Oh, there, we're live. Hey, hi, it's Meg Riley. I think we're all a little bit discombobulated today. My sound just started working, hooray. And, it's just, Aisha said she slept too late, can't get up for this. And my cell phone's lost and my car doesn't work and it's 8 below here and blah, 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 blah. Life goes on in this zombie apocalypse.
Your pickup's dead. Somebody stole your dog. A train hit your mama. Yeah.
Pretty much. So I'm Meg Riley here in cold Minneapolis. Joanna?
Hi, I'm Joanna Fontaine Crawford, and I am here in roller coaster Austin, where it's cold today, and then it's going to be warm tomorrow, and then by Sunday it's going to be freezing again.
All right. And today we are joined by Reverend Carlton Elliott Smith. Where are you today, Carlton?
I'm greetings from Holly Springs, Mississippi.
Oh, you're home. Great.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Alondria Williams, where are you today?
Yeah, I'm Landry and I'm in Nashville, Tennessee.
Welcome. Nashville, you said?
Yeah, I'm in Nashville.
Okay, great. Well, wonderful to have Carlton and Alondria here. They're from Black Lives of VUU, and I think we're going to jump right in because Alondria is under a deadline, and we'll talk as long as we can talk here. So we're in a new world in terms of a non-petitionable government and, probably the demise of the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division that we've been leaning on to do some systemic changing. How do you see organizing shifting in this time?
Carlton, you want to go first?
Oh, I think that you're more in the midst of it than I am. I'm a UU minister, mostly dealing in UU context. So I think that you're more in the mix than I am. So hit it.
All righty. So I just want to put their disclaimer that I live in a different reality than I think most people do. So this is not the answer that I think people are going to want to hear or are ready for. So I live in Tennessee. And so I have been in Trumplandia for most of my life. And so I don't think I'm really in that much place different. I live in a place where the governor is trying to privatize everything. And they're now in arguments over whether they stop the bathroom bill. They're in arguments around what it means to move that forth, because in the midst of the election of Donald Trump, we actually had more Republicans come into office. So in most southern states, actually, we have way more Republicans in office than we had before. And right before the election, like right when I turned the corner of my house, there were every single neo-Nazi and Confederate flag signs up for sale, and they sold out within an hour. And so I actually figured that Donald Trump would win the election, because that's who I'm around every day. And so I actually think what this time is calling for is for us to get out of our bubbles. Is for us to not believe that our Facebook pages are reflective of what people are thinking. And instead, it's time to really listen. Whose voices are being heard? Who's being talked to? Are people actually talking to their family? Or are they actually staying in with the people they like to talk to? And so I do think this government is creating a different way of moving forward. But I was at the biggest immigration rights conference in the world, in the country, right? The National Immigrant Integration Conference. And just the fact that it's called the National Immigrant Integration Conference says everything about where we're at right now, right? And so the fact that people had to do an accent on Luis Gutierrez, right? Representative Gutierrez says everything about where we're at right now. So we have been making compromise after compromise after compromise for so very long. And we have, even under President Obama, we've had the most deportations of any president. And so where we're at right now is actually, we have decided to say we will give in so much that we don't have a line of which we stand on. So in some ways, this was our fault, right? And instead of going, where is our line? And we will go no further. We're not ready yet. And so to me, it's not just about Donald Trump. It's not just about who we put in office. It's also about what are we standing on? And what do we say no to, right? And not just in protest ways, not just in courts, in general. And so that's where I feel like we're at. I feel like there is going to be a different way in which we have to organize. And I think we're going to have to organize instead of saying, here's the compromise point. Here's actually the baseline things that we're going to stand for. And then what does that look like, right? What does it mean to take leadership from? And that we can't directly impact that people are going to look really different now, right? because there's going to be directly impacted people in terms of like who's actually directly impacted by the things. And there's going to have to be a group of white people who have leverage in a different way that are going to have to step up, not in terms of controlling the agenda, but are going to have to step up in controlling leverage in terms of like where money goes, where resources goes, where time goes, around their own engagement with their own, with people that they can trust. And around how do we distribute resources? It can't just be who we want to distribute them to, but actually a much broader way of doing that. And to me, that's where I see stuff changing. I will say I see in the last like couple weeks have met a whole bunch of white people who are more left, who are like, okay, I now am tired of investing in the coast. I really do want to invest in the South and the Midwest. And that to me has been really interesting and fun. And watching people who are originally from the South who moved to the coast going, oh my goodness, I can't just leave home. I have to figure out how this is going to work. And so that to me is where I feel like the UA has a beautiful, and UUs have a beautiful way of playing into that on whatever front they're in. Because to me, this time calls for how do we really like wiggle our way through, and how do we go underground and think like what Mama said to me, well, you know, Elena, this is like Hubert Humphrey. Like we've been here before. Like it's gonna, I mean, it could be worse. Like we could be in Syria right now, or we could be 100 years ago as Black people. And so for us to just like gather ourselves up for strength and go, we've been in worse shape before in my parents' lifetime. And so now how do we take that? Thank
you. Wow. Alandra, you've, as you say, you've lived in Tennessee your whole life pretty much, right?
Not exactly, but I've lived in Tennessee a good part of it.
So what have you seen that's worked? Like, I mean, you've been an organizer that whole time. Have you seen people hold a line in a way that actually had power?
I have, both when I was younger, older, and working in different places. So I work at a place called the Highlander Center, Highlander Research and Education Center. And it was fun when I first got there. I did interviews in all of our states that we worked at. And I remember going to rural West Virginia and rural Virginia in the mountains and meeting with people who were like, you know, when I got to Highlander, I voted Republican. But, you know, we had to like defeat like the fact someone was trying to take over our land in Virginia. They were trying to blow it up and they were trying to strip it. So even though like I had never met people who were Black before, I had no idea what's going on. We came together because this had to be stopped. And so I feel like when we started a union on campus, we figured out how to come together. People didn't really love unions. They were like, what do we have to do? We defeated 287 Gs where I live and all came together. But the thing is, people had to figure out, like, people had to study. We don't study anymore. We taught about imperialism and NAFTA and colonialism, and people learn. So like yesterday, I was just having a conversation with somebody about talk to me about Aleppo. I don't understand. And so we were like, let's talk about empire building. And so part of the thing is we had to get to the root of like, why is this actually happening? What does it mean that I'm surrounded by people who are Baroque, white, Black, Latino, and otherwise? And like, what does that mean, right? So when I'm driving in North Carolina and the signs are saying, need a job, vote Trump. And we have decided that those areas are unimportant. Rural is like not important and rural equals white, right? So we've got a whole bunch of people who've like decided to stop even operating in rural and small town contexts because we've been in this mega city process where only people important are mega cities. I would say that the other thing that I see that is the reason actually why Florida went red, and people don't understand why Florida went red, is because, and Ohio in large part, and parts of Michigan screwed up, is that the people who were former felons, people who like had felony charges and had gotten out at that point. So in Florida 8 years ago could vote. Florida 4 years ago could vote. Then the governor and Congress, like, and the state Senate flipped and said, actually, no, you can't vote anymore. And so you took a huge part of people who could vote out. And that was the percentage that actually allowed Democratic things to win. And so while we're talking about the Voting Rights Act being decimated, the thing that we're not talking about is all the people who literally cannot vote, even though they should be allowed to. And most people I know didn't want to vote because they were like, Hillary sucks, Donald Trump sucks. So like people, what will win is when you actually have somebody that you actually want to vote for. And so when you have something that you actually are fighting for. So there have been plenty of times and for campaigns and for fights that people are like, this long-term battle is one that I actually want to win. And this is something that will help me day to day and will feed my family and allows me to have liberatory victory. And I think that's what I've seen happen. And some people have been able to come in, say, this is what I want. How does that mean what we want? And so you have a much more like participatory sense of being, whether it's through people's movement assemblies, whether it's through workers assemblies, whether it's through all these different ways that people can actually interact with each other to collectively create a process for what they want to see. Not have somebody tell them what they want, but to collectively create agendas for their own liberation.
Thanks. Carlton, you got anything to add as a UU minister? You were saying that's where you locate yourself.
Yeah, I would underscore what Alandria was saying about the need to come out of our bubbles. I think that, you know, we very much, and it's been one of the things as I've been going around talking about Black Lives of UU and Black Lives Matter and the intersection of all of that is how we do live inside of bubbles, and our Unitarian Universalist context is a particular kind of bubble that we live inside of. And if you live in a typical neighborhood where a Unitarian Universalist congregation is located, you're somewhat insulated from that. And there are some liberals who are saying, and I think including Garrison Keillor in one of his commentaries was saying something to the effect of, oh, well, we'll just wait this out, you know, for the next, 4 years or whatever. But it's like some of us aren't going to survive the next 4 years while other people are waiting out. So I would underscore what Alandria is saying, the need to come out of our bubbles to actually be in community and conversations with one another. I'm a bit reminded of what happened in Massachusetts. I was living in Massachusetts at the time that marriage equality hit there back in the early 2000s. And I remember being at the State House and people screaming at each other and, waving their placards and posters and all of the upset. And I was thinking, I was looking at all of that animosity and thinking to myself, it's like these are conversations that needed to happen around people's kitchen tables. If we were able to do more of that, we wouldn't need to have like these big conflagrations. And that's not to say that the conflagrations don't have their place. And certainly we need to speak out and protest injustice when it happens. But I think the opportunity now is to be intentional about engaging in these conversations. All of that said, we know that if we are in a climate where people aren't listening to each other, aren't paying attention, and are determined to use force by any means necessary to get their needs met or to have some sense of security, that we're going to have problems all along. So I think there is something to be said for continuing to be supportive of one another and look out for each other, and to continue to build those cross-cultural and multicultural coalitions that Alandria is speaking of.
Thanks. Did you guys see Peter Morales's letter that went out yesterday? Either you
Definitely
want to say anything about it?
I appreciate that he is speaking out and encouraging us to be aware of the times that we're living in. And I have had this concern myself for a very long time that we're entering into like a very dangerous time. And I think it's even more dangerous because we have different commentators on news programs, and even the mainstream media, as we know it, is now normalizing Trumpism. And I think that's very problematic. And not that the UUA as an institution, as a political enterprise or entity. And we do have people who are Trump supporters inside of our UUA. I don't think we should never lose sight of that fact as well. How do we balance this out, and how do we have some of those reconciling congregations? I know that there's some desire at this point to sort of say you can't be a Unitarian Universalist and having voted for this candidate for president. And I think we have to reconcile the fact that we've always had people inside of our UUA who are conservative, who are Trump supporters, some of whom make choices that are consistent with racist policies and practices. So I think there's some reconciliation we have to do amongst ourselves. So that would probably be a great place to start, as Unitarian Universalists. How do we hold all of this intention and even talk across the boundaries that exist inside of our own communities?
Yeah, we certainly have. I mean, we came out of racism and haven't left. That's indisputable. I think the totalitarian nature of what's going on, though, is antithetical to even racist UUs. I mean, I'm going to be really interested to see how those conversations go. We did have a marriage equality thing here that was completely conversation based. 800,000 one-to-one conversations took place, and we defeated a homophobic initiative. I've been working with Showing Up for Racial Justice, trying to have similar conversations about racism, and we have not found the right way in. I'll tell you that. The bubble doesn't even describe it. It's like Teflon. I mean, it's just getting in with another point of view on police violence is what we were trying to talk to people about. And it's impervious to fact. And so I think that's a really interesting place that UUs who tend to talk about information as if that's going to convert people, that isn't going to work with people who are steeped in racism and also in just the lies of the media around stuff. Well, Andrea,
I think one of the biggest, and so it's interesting, right? Because I feel like I operate in probably one of the craziest, like overt racist environments, period, at the time. And at the same time, it's a like how most of this stuff is also, so I think how race and class intersect in this world is ginormous, right? And so this is the first time that my county went blue. Like I live in Knox County. Knox County has not gone blue in like 30 years. Ever since like Al Gore Sr. was there. People loved Al Gore Sr. And it went blue in large part because like some stuff came out. My friend Zach was like, hold on. Some other friends of mine were like, hold up now. Like he's literally talking about our friends. So people normally were like, they've done some weird stuff over the time, but we're like, this is a little much, y'all. Are we seeing this? But those are the same kids that at one point called somebody a nigger man and now punched in the face when we were in 7th grade, right? So part of this is like, if this is not about changing anybody when they get 70. That ain't happening. Changing somebody when they get 40. That actually isn't happening either. That's why the work with youth in our denomination was central. That's why when it got taken out, it was such a big deal because really you change people when they're young. You don't change them when they're 50. Only people that can change people when they're 50 is their children. I mean, like, to be really honest, there's somebody really close enough up to them that they're like, oh my God, I am messing with my people, my kids, my family. I love them. Oh gosh. Right? Like that's the only way it's going to happen. And most people get changed, not because of an adult, but because of a young person. Like, because they're like, oh no, I'm like destroying your life. I don't want to do that anymore. And so I think we're like logic is not actually what moves people. What moves people is emotions. So now logic might move me because I'm like super thinking person. But like we got multiple types of people in this world on the thinking feeling spectrum. And so there's a couple of people that will move because of logic. Most people don't move because of logic. They move because something has hurt them. And so the reason I'm saying it is it's like at some level, the reason why people like had some sort of shifts over time has been seeing immense stuff happen to people. Like, I can't believe we did that as a society. What does that say about me? Like, that is what's shifted people. And I think the thing around policing is that so where I live, white people actually experience police brutality. They do, because they're broke, they have nothing. So if there's not enough, so in certain areas of this country, like Eastern Kentucky, West Virginia, they're experiencing being policed. So that means they're much more likely to be like, oh yeah, I'm police, you police, we police together. But it doesn't mean everyone will experience that because a whole bunch of people have money, right? And so I just think for some people, it's so far out of their realm of consciousness. And like, it would mean that you have to like concede that the system is completely and utterly meant to be flawed. Like, if you concede that the police state and the military, because the policing and military state are the same. So if you concede that the police state is like completely flawed, then you have to actually agree that the state is flawed. People don't want to deal with that. So this is beyond like, oh no, police brutality is bad. This is like, oh gosh, I have to literally deal with everything I know being like thrown to hell. And like our media and everything we've ever, like what we learn in school, you'd have to throw out the window. And people aren't ready to have that conversation. So that's what I mean. To me, it's not just about like, oh gosh, I hate Black people, or oh gosh, I hate brown. That's a part of it. But it's even deeper than that, because then you have to deal with like my grandfather fucked up. Excuse me the French. But my like, it's like the day I sat with somebody, we were in Nashville, back in Nashville. And I was helping do a class around race, racism, and civil rights movement. And one of the young people who was in the class, a college young, he was like 18, he was a college student. We were having this conversation about the Nashville sit-in movements around Fisk. And he was like, oh my gosh, I love this person, da 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 da, having this conversation. Next thing he knows, he looks at a picture. And he looks, and it's like the police officer who arrested somebody is his father. His father. He had to go home and be like, Dad, how did you do this? You were against the movement. And his dad was like, son, I know, and I had to work this job. He was like, no, Dad. So like he now had to come to terms with his own father was against the thing that he thought was the best, that thing that we had to have done at that time. That's what this will mean in this country. And so I think because we haven't done that reconciliation in some way, not like, oh, we're going to sweep it under the mat and be cute about it, but like what it means to hold in the fact that if your family does a homesteader, you colonize a whole group of people, and now you are still benefiting off that colonization. So either you make a decision that in order to be righteous, you have to go back to Europe, right? So that's where we are at. And that's what people do not want to deal with. So I think it is easy to talk about like what it means for people to like understand small things. The small things actually mean really big things. And that's what people don't want to deal with. So that was a whole bunch of stuff. But I think like that's where it has to go in this country. And we are not ready to have that conversation at all.
I think this issue of defining reality, which has always been important, is going to be even so much more important. And there's like these different levels of this, because on one hand you have Trump, who is coming out and just bald-faced lying, all these illegal votes, and that's one level of defining reality. And I know that y'all and the rest of Blue have really been involved in this issue of how do you define reality in a world that has been centering all of it on a white worldview. How do we move forward in defining what is really happening so that we are able to see who the most vulnerable truly are? Because right now, right, everyone thinks that, that was part of the Trump vote, right? Was all of these people who felt that they were the most vulnerable. How do we define reality so that we can move in and do the work that's needed?
I think it has something to do with having an understanding of how whiteness as a phenomenon works inside of our context, and that includes seeing what's happened with this election. Excuse me. What we see is that now whiteness and its function has taken over the conversation, which is how whiteness operates. It's like, no, you don't get to hold the microphone. We need to center, now the conversation is basically, we need to center our, national conversations inside whiteness, and now all the attention is flowing back in that direction at a time when, we did have a Black president for 8 years, when we did, and as, Alandria mentioned, we had this upswing in deportations of people out of the country. There was an upswing in violence against people of color. So all of this is all happening at the same time. And the result of it is, as we see now, sort of like whiteness reasserting itself in a very aggressive way. And it's not just like any, it's not just like your, garden variety white candidate who's risen to power. It's like your, we're longing, I find myself longing for the good old, George W. Bush days, that's the way, where I am with it. And that's kind of, and I never thought I would say that, but here we are. But somebody who is outrageous, who is bigoted, and who has not, shied from that stance in any way, shape, or form. Thinking a bit back to what Alandria was saying earlier, just about how power plays out and how the dynamics play out, and how people tend to roll with their emotions. I'll never forget a conversation or a lecture I heard by Dr. Tom Dayaka, one of our Unitarian Universalist theologians and scholars, who was talking about the difference between what happens typically amongst Unitarian Universalists, and we want to argue with people from a logical standpoint. And that's fine, except there's no arguing with people about their identity. And what we bumped up against with this election is it's like, yes, you can make logical arguments with people about, you know, why Trump presidency shouldn't work, or why we shouldn't have all of these, you know, billionaire business executives in positions of power and the conflicts of interest. But what we're bumping up against is identity, and white identity in the American context there's just no understating how huge it is and how powerful it is as a force. So as long as people are, you know, as long as people are, you know, centering themselves in that, as long as that part of them feels threatened, and I think a lot of white people are feeling threatened now, just because, you know, you can, because we do live in a certain kind of bubble inside the United States, the bubble of whiteness that is trying to keep the global majority out. But I'd say similar to, you know, a city that's built, you know, under sea level, you know, you can build all the levees and all the protections that you want to, there at some point, you know, those are going to be breached. And I think it's what people are seeing and experiencing and not liking at all, that it's not always going to be the case. And so now, you know, by any means necessary, trying to retain that power and that authority. And again, it's not like Trump actually won the election, did not win the popular vote, but we have this anachronism, the Electoral College that's in place, that basically handed the Republicans the election, you know, twice in a row in the span of not twice in a row, but twice in the span of 16 years. So there's just some deep thinking that needs to be going on around that, and figuring out how Unitarian Universalists engage in that in a way that is respectful of, you know, we have differing opinions inside of our congregations, but yet we are trying to move our congregation move our congregations and our denomination in a direction that is more consistent with our deepest Unitarian Universalist values and with a vision for the future.
So I think all I would add to that, because I agree with everything Carlton said, is I think we just need to have a real conversation around what it means to have a global elite, and like what interests are at play. There's been so much fight against the TPP that has happened in working class communities, what's happened in different communities, that the second Hillary Clinton said she was for the TPP, it was like cut off, done. I mean, this is the first time you've seen giants, like the majority of the AFL-CIO membership, vote for Republican. And they did it because they're like, did you just say you're voting for the TPP? Like, we've been fighting against every free trade agreement, and you literally just said you're voting for the TPP? What interests of yours are in this thing? I mean, and so you're like, wrong answer. You know, like when you're sitting there saying, okay, we're at Standing Rock fighting the thing, and you give like the answer that said, I'm not against it. Well, then what differentiates you? What is the differentiation between you and Donald Trump? Right? So he says all these things, but we know you've actually done some of these things in your time with Clinton. We know this. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had a 3 strikes rule. We wouldn't have had stop and frisk. So it is so that is the part where I think for some people, they got really confused. And so although I can say Donald Trump, I wish wasn't in office, I think we also have to be really clear about where we're at right now. Because the real question is, what is the global elite doing to run things regardless? And as we as UUs are in that, we're like real close. Some of us are real close. What then do we do in terms of shifting? Because I think that is not the conversation sometimes being had right now. And for people who so I think part of our role as people in faith communities is to figure out how do we spiritually fortify folks that are dealing with a whole lot, right? And so how do we do spiritual fortification of people who, regardless of who was going to win or lose, we're losing, right? What is that role? What is our job as spiritual fortifiers to say, how do we help whole members of our community in this time? Because whiteness is a creation. that was created for one reason. It was to separate white people who would be aligned with Black people, Native people who were in struggle away and move them toward a white elite. That was the only reason it exists. So we actually have to remember that point, because I know way too many white people who are like barely have toilet paper. So like the real question is, I am not in this thing where all Black people are the same, nor am I in the thing where all white people are the same, because there's way too much class. I'm like, some Black people have, some of us have a level of class background that insulates us still from some of it. Some of us are a little bit more insulated than others. There are white people that are all the way insulated. And so I think that we are at a time right now where we have to go, what is the global elite trying to do? What does it mean for power and capital to, like, we're in the ending stages of capitalism as we know it. It's going to shift to something else. So what does that mean for us in our faith community? To stand up and say, actually, we don't want certain things to go down. What is our role right now? Because I don't think our role is the same. And I don't think we're under totalitarianism, because I have way too many friends that were actually under totalitarian governments that I can't actually believe that that's where I'm at right now. Because then that actually like gives me in some weird US thing that I'm like, that no, that's actually not where I'm at. So I think like how we hold that, I think is going to be really important. And I think like, what is our role in that as Unitarian Universalists? We're a small but mighty bunch. So how does our small but mighty bunch figure out how to do that? That to me is what's really important. And in all of our work to figure out how do we, and if whiteness is constructed, but there clearly is impacts of racism and white supremacy at work, what does that mean for us to say, okay, how do we stand in this? And what does that mean for us to shift it to a point to where even if we're in this thing for the next 4 years, how do we look, how are we different 4 years later than we are now as a faith movement and as our work?
I'm thinking last week we had Scott Nakagawa here. I don't know if you know him. And he said something that your comments made me think of, Alandria. He said that white people who think that white privilege will protect us are not understanding the purpose of whiteness or racism. That yes. In fact, if we choose to be protected by our whiteness, it means that we are going to align ourselves with it and ignore it. And I feel that whenever white people say to me, well, I'll be okay, I'm like, really? Because what are you planning to do that's going to make you okay? Because I love people. I'm already not okay, so yeah. I feel like that point that he made has resonated with me all week. And now I'm hearing it again, that this idea of white privilege, which is kind of the college way that we talk about all of it, in a way obfuscates of course I'm safer with a cop. Of course I am. But the minute that I don't act, the minute that I'm a race traitor, I'm not. So I think that's just really important for white people to sit with as an identity issue. Do you now, because Highland is so famous for popular education, do you know popular education programs? Because this is deep stuff and complicated stuff. And our people are the people who want to understand. Where would you send people to get some sense of orientation besides out into the world?
No, yeah, and it's beautiful, right? Because Scott Nakagawa, I learned from him. He used to be a Highlander, right? Which is like, yes, we all have some of the similar analysis. It's great. So I think this is going to be complicated because I'm a complicated one on the earth. To me, there's like popular education places to go. You are fully welcome to come to Highlander. We have a curricula. We're shopping. We're sending it around. We don't charge, right? So we're sending it around. People are going to Catalyst. The police guide have a person that's not white also train you. I think there are people doing various things. To me, it's like there are places to go, right? There's Woodbine. There's a whole bunch of centers. You can look them up. There's Culture Strike. I could give a list. I actually think the question is like, what do you actually need? What do you need? Because I think that people go places that are not actually what they need. So I'm like, go to People's Institute, but let me clear, if you're like 20 and trans and multiracial and adopted, it may not actually always be the place for you, because that sounds evil, but it's true. That's what my discovery 15 years ago, and it's still there today. So I think that my hope is actually that we can figure out how to raise up enough resources to bring back groundwork, right? To raise up enough resources And so that would be my hope, is so that we could start again, have an amazing, beautiful, like anti-racism program within the UUA that is connected to every other program. Because I think that we actually have to do our own work in connection with everybody else, right? And I think that's partly what people are trying to figure out now. It just needs to be resourced. Because I think the thing that is honest about our faith is, like, we're out there doing the work, a lot of us as individuals, but it doesn't mean that we're all fully connected. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about Blue, is that, you know, I can be a member of Blue. Clearly, like, most of my work is not within Blue. It is within Highlander, or I'm doing this project called Beautiful Solutions, and we have a beautiful training program about what are the things that people are doing that are solutionary, right? And that there's not only a way, there's like all these ways, right? And so I get to be blessed that I get to do all these things that most people don't get to do, but I'm like so happy to send people all these different ways and examples, and I'm like, yeah. But I can also do Blue. And I think that's really important, right? There are things that all of us do that we don't all have to agree with each other, right? And so that to me is the strongest thing, is that we all want the same thing, but we can have different strategies for getting there. And I think that is the thing that's really important now, right? Is that based on where you are, where are you trying to go? I'm happy to send resources to, like, the lovely people at the VUU, you know, so that people can go hear the multitude of options based upon me and what I need. Because I think that's the one thing we have not done very well. We have not done well, both as a UU community and everybody else. We do prescriptions, and then it's like that prescription doesn't work and there is nothing else. But it's like we're not trying to cure, like, I don't know, like, we're not curing a disease with one pill. We're like saying this is like embedded in our society and in who we are. So we need a multitude of strategies, both homeopathic, and you might need a pill too, right? And so I think that's like where we're at.
Yeah, I'll just put in a plug here for white people for the Safety Pin project that Leslie Mack, who's part of Blue, and Marissa, is it? Yeah, who's from Seattle, who I don't actually know, who's one of the Black Lives Matter national leaders, have developed. It starts with power mapping, where your power is, and figuring out how you can have influence wherever you are in every moment of your life. I really recommend it to people. I'm excited by it. And as I said on Facebook, I've been excited a lot lately, but not in a good way. So it's good to feel excited about something. Let's talk for a minute about where you see UUs protecting and defending the most targeted folks. A lot of churches are talking about becoming sanctuary churches. I know 3 of them here are the UUs and 30 others, a lot of Lutherans, which is good. We want the Lutherans in on it in Minnesota. But I'm curious if you've seen bold action that you think is a great thing for people who want to support the most vulnerable coming in, that could work in a UU setting, understanding that they're all different.
I'd say that we're just on the front of that wave of figuring out, like, what action is going to make a difference. I will say that I'm personally heartened to know that there is sort of this resurgence of interest in congregations becoming sanctuaries. I think it's going to become more necessary and more important to have places where people actually have literal physical protection from violence that might be visited upon them or being separated from their families. So I'm all very much in support of that, and hope that we see more of that. But I think we're just, starting to see it. I hope that there will be things that are just going to be, as you were saying, exciting and surprising. And it's like, oh, I never would have thought of that. And I think that that's what this time is calling for us to do, whatever we need to do to protect and defend the people who are most vulnerable. We in Black Lives of UU, we're continuing to be supportive of those who are going to Standing Rock, and very much aligned with that movement. I'm very much committed to maintaining a stance of intersectionality, so that we are paying attention to the relationship, as Alandria was indicating earlier, to what's happening with trans people, what's happening with Black people who are immigrating or trying to immigrate to the United States. All of these are things that we have to hold in tension. Whereas, there are forces at work that would try to separate and divide us and say immigration doesn't have anything to do with Black Lives Matter, and the lives of, Asian American people doesn't have to do with the lives of Indigenous American people. So we're trying to just continue to mix that up and break it down and stand for, our shared humanity. as people, and reflect that, that our first principle of Unitarian Universalism, which is lifting up each of our inherent worth and dignity.
Yeah, I mean, I think the two things I would add is like one, we'll share more, I'm sure, in a second around our blue convening, which is something that congregations can do to help support Black UUs and having some sanctuary. So the thing that I think about a lot is, so I grew up UU, as most people know already. And so when I was a kid, I just remember like us being like, okay, we're going to hold Central Americans. Okay, anytime something happens, we're going to deal with it. If our church is shot up, here's what we're going to do. And so like what I remember is our church being a sanctuary church for almost all of my life. And so it's an interesting thing to act like it's new to me, because I just thought that's what we do, And so I feel like when ever people needed to come through and have a place to stay, our church is always open. There was never a question. If like I actually remember going through massive stuff around police brutality that impacted me, my brother, and a whole bunch of people in the community, And so in the middle of doing those citizens police review boards, like our minister was there, like the DRE was there, and like we were able to come into church and just talk through it, right? And so I didn't have to go find a therapist. I actually could talk to my minister, when like things would always go down. So like when the church, like when one of the churches like in our town, like they tried to bomb it, members from our church went and worshiped with them. And there's always like, we will be sister churches, and we will do what we can do to not make this happen. And so I think that that's what I remember growing up. And even, like once I started doing way more stuff with Black Lives Matter in Knoxville, like they were always there. And so I think that's, to me, the reality is like, so we can add on, or we can just do what we're supposed to do. And so I think, it is a different, there's a thing around like, if this is what we are called for at this time, then it doesn't have to be this wild, expansive thing that we like advertise everywhere. It's just do what churches or worship houses of worship are like. Spiritual people are like people in general. Who cares if you're spiritual, witch, and pagan, or like a non-thean and you're atheist? Like we're supposed to do this, and how do we use these buildings? We have all these buildings to like do something good. And so that's the thing that for me is really important, is I think that we create like all of these things and all of these programs, and who's going to share. And I'm like, can we just be normal today? Can we just do what we're supposed to do? And so then it doesn't have to be this giant like program that's around. It's just the way we live our lives. And so thank you, Carlton, for talking on the immigration thing. I mean, I was just at a conference around the Black Immigration Network. We had a panel that helped start this Black Immigration Network, and talking about how many Black people we don't know that are immigrants, right? And then are undocumented, and we don't know what people are going through, and we don't actually know what anybody's going through. So I want to say that I think both is about being sanctuary for people who are immigrants, all these different identity groups, but frankly, we need to be sanctuary for the members of our congregations and community that we don't know anything is going on around. So like, that's the part we're not good at sometimes. It's like, oh, stuff is actually happening in your life. I didn't even know it because it's not visible. It's not the thing that is on our masthead, or that's not the thing that Sizzle is like talking about right now. But like, how do we be sanctuary in general? And that's a really Christian concept, right? So like, how do we show love, period? And that to me is what's going to happen. If we do that across the board, then people will always know to come to us, right? If we're always a place where like love is like the baseline, where we're ready to like fix people's front porches. That's why I love like the Black church I went to when I was younger, because the porch would get fixed. We come in, we do anything for people, right? And so it was always a place that the house built, like that, always a place that love was there in. So there was no conversation about how do we do this. That's just what we did. That was our practice. So if we can get that in our practice and say, we should definitely have a church band. So like, if we can get those things in our practice, then it doesn't have to be the thing that happens when something pops off. So that's my little like sermonette of the day. Because I think we're not so good at that.
Amen. I see Joanna and Carl, the minister, is going, yep. So let's, I see we're coming up on time. So let me ask you a couple other questions. The Women's March on Washington, I know that Lena's working on that on behalf of Blue, and I'm curious what you're thinking, what's up with that?
So I'm gonna let Carlton take this one.
Yes, you know, the Women's March on Washington has been something that's been a conversation amongst those of us involved in Black Lives of UU for a minute, since we were aware that it was going to be happening, and it's something that people have been seeking out our opinions on. In more recent, within the past couple of weeks, we settled on the idea that Lena K. Gardner, who's a part of the organizing collective, would be the primary contact for Black Lives of UU with regards to the march. The march started off being focused, I would say, with a bit of being a bit centered in whiteness and in white women's experiences. As it progressed further, there became a greater awareness that there was a need to diversify, to have it be representative of more women's experiences rather than just primarily white women's experiences. And so there were adjustments made in the leadership to affect that, and our involvement as Black Lives of UU is part of that. So we are signing on as one of the co-sponsors of the event, and we'll be engaged in some of the decision making and the programming around that, and very much looking forward to it. We know that there are lots of white Unitarian Universalist women who are committed to being there as well. So just know that Black Lives of UU will be represented, and doing whatever we can do to represent, again, that intersectionality and to help make a difference with this major national event that's coming up in just a few weeks.
I'm sorry, everybody, I have to go.
Okay.
You gotta go? Okay, Alandria.
It was great talking to all of you.
So much. I think you fit an hour's worth in. Carlton, can you talk about the convening? So Black Lives of UU is having a convening. You want to just describe it?
Yes, I'm glad to. One of the things that we recognized early on in our process of organizing, that we needed to have an opportunity to gather as many Black Unitarian Universalists as possible in an explicitly Black space, to have conversations that we don't usually have the opportunity to have. We have to remember, too, that Black Lives of UU emerged out of the movement for Black Lives Convening that happened in July of 2015, which again was another explicitly Black space where we had a chance to talk amongst ourselves. And at that point, there wasn't a point where we got all the Black Unitarian Universalists together, but we had up to 8 of us together at a time, and that's where the seeds and the groundwork for Black Lives of UU were planted. So really, from that time, there's been talk of doing a national gathering of Black Unitarian Universalists. I think this will be the first one in almost 50 years. The last one was in the late 60s, and we're very excited about it. We just this week have signed our contract with the hotel that is going to be the host venue. It's going to be the DoubleTree Inn in New Orleans. We were down there just a few weeks back, the 7 of us on the organizing collective, doing some planning and some advanced work in that regard. It's going to be a great occasion, a multi-generational gathering. I recently had a chance to speak with Dr. Ntongolise Sanyika, who was one of the primary leaders of the Black Affairs Council and the Black Unitarian Universalist Caucus back in the late 60s and early 70s. And of course, we have a huge, doing what we're doing now is part of the continuation and part of that legacy from the 60s and some of the challenges and some of the triumphs that they experienced in their time. So he and others who are from that era and from that time are looking forward to being there. We're very much excited to greet them and be in conversation. So it's going to be a great gathering. It's going to be March 9 to 12, starting on Thursday evening and going through the following Sunday morning. We are encouraging Black Unitarian Universalists to be there, and that includes lay people, ministers, religious educators, administrators, musicians, all of y'all to be there. And really encouraging congregations to support Black Unitarian Universalists in getting there. And the registration goes live next week, and we'll have more about how congregations can do that, whether or not they have Black people inside their membership or not.
So we'll be posting that on our Facebook page.
Oh, yeah.
So will it be structured the way that the Movement for Black Lives Convening was structured? That was one amazing event to watch from the outside.
There will be some things that'll be similar. I think the main thing that we're looking at is now that we've gotten such a strong affirmation from the UUA board in terms of a long-term financial commitment is figuring out what the structure of it is that we want going forward, and there'll be an opportunity to have conversations about that, opportunities for worship, and looking at different styles of worship in Black context, and so that will be part of what we'll be having as well. We're also going to have a candidates forum of our UUA president's candidates and having them come speak to us, and that will be historic in itself because I don't think there's ever been an opportunity for the presidential candidates for our association to address, you know, a congregation of Black Unitarian Universalists, specifically about Black Unitarian Universalist concerns. So very excited for that as well.
That's exciting. So that's March 9th to 12th.
March 9th to 12th, yes, coming up very soon.
Yeah, that is very soon. So it'll be fun to hear what comes out of that. I feel like Alandria does kind of like double time. I'm like,
she's a powerful woman.
Yeah, she's amazing. Yeah. Is there anything, Carlton, that we didn't talk about that you were hoping to talk about today?
I think that covers quite a bit of it. I'm just really, again, grateful for the cooperation and support we're getting from our larger association, and really wanting people to think about like what they can do, you know, in this day and time to be a support to people who are most marginalized and most vulnerable. As each one of these new cabinet appointees for President-elect Trump is mentioned, I just cringe a little bit because none of it bodes very well, I think, for everyday people. And we know that, as the old saying goes, when white people catch pneumonia, when white people catch a cold, Black people catch pneumonia. So we're going to be Black people and other people who are vulnerable, whether they're people who are differently abled, or people who are older, or people who are very young, people who are immigrants, people who are undocumented. All of these folks, or all of us folks, are going to be in the impact of it. People who are women, no doubt, are all very much at risk in these days coming up. So I think we just really have to be consistent in our commitment to support and protect and look out for each other.
Amen to that. Yeah, I noticed Sean Dennison posted something about expanding sanctuary. You think about trans people, especially Black trans. Yes. And I thought, yeah, thinking about sanctuary, as Alandria was saying, in a very big religious way, I think is what we're going to need to be doing. And
yeah. And I have to say, I love her idea that, you know, can we just not make a big deal out of it? Can we just, you know, do our work and speak up when it's time to speak up, and take a stand when it's time to take a stand, and not look for the cameras or look for the accolades or post it on Facebook? It's like, can we just, you know, do the work because it's important, you know, for all of us in all of our lives. It's just as human beings sharing the planet together. That's what I hope for.
Right, and not get so involved in trying to imagine what is coming, that we're not taking time to deal with the reality that's right in front of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would say again, you know, it's a great opportunity to again empower the leadership of women and women of color in particular, and so that's something that we're constantly, you know, lifting up as well. Again, speaking of folks who are, you know, quite vulnerable in this situation that we find ourselves in now. I think the temptation is going to be great to discount those voices. And as we've seen already, I'm just thinking about Melissa Harris Perry now losing her show. I mean, it's like flipping the page and it's like we're going to move on, but it's like, no, these are voices that still need to be heard and still need to be deeply part of the conversation. And I think it's time for each of us to look at the places where we have privilege and what we can do to leverage whatever privilege we have to bring more voices to the table, and to share and to learn and to grow and to make space for more of us.
And to continue the progress that we're hoping to make, you know, not to just get settled into a defensive stance.
Yeah, amen. Well, always enlightening. Thanks so much. We'll be here next week. I'm not quite sure what's going on, but we'll be doing something.
There you go.
We'll be here. And then the week after, we'll take off, the week between Christmas and New Year's. But thanks so much, Carlton. It's always great when Blue comes. And this will be a podcast. thank you to Terri Burnor, who's behind that chalice.
Thank you, Terri.
See y'all next time.
All right. And thank you again, Meg and Joanna, for your continued support. Really appreciate it.
Bye-bye.